All right. Looks like we have a critical mass of folks. We have a number of folks that have joined us already. So I am going to kick us off. Once again, if you just joined, my name is Carla Robles Reyes, and I get the honor of serving as OneGoal's Chief Program Officer and your host for this webinar today. Before we dig in, I'd like to get a sense of, I know where you live now or where you're at and the weather, but like who is in the audience with us today? We are going to kick off by launching a quick poll to learn more about our audience. The question here being, how are you connected to OneGoal? Let's see these start to roll in. We got some current OneGoal partners in the audience, peers working in the sector. Thank you for joining us, friends. Prospective OneGoal partners, that's exciting. I hope what you hear today helps provide you more information. Community members, we love that. Foundations, donors. We have quite a wide audience here. I'm really excited. Okay, we got about 2/3 of you all who have responded. I see those numbers, those results still coming in. But yeah, pretty good mix between prospective OneGoal partners, current OneGoal partners, peers in the sector, and coming in at 3rd and 5th here, or 4th and 5th here, some community members and donors and supporters of this work. All right. Shall we get started? Great. All right, folks. Thank you again for answering the poll. It's exciting to see that we have this wide audience of folks joining us today. Let's go through some quick housekeeping before I get started. Throughout this webinar, please share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. I'm going to try my hardest to answer these questions as we go along. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll do our best to weave them into our panel discussion. And so please provide those to the extent they come up for you. We are recording this webinar today, and anyone who registered will receive a copy of the recording. And lastly, I do encourage you to follow the chat, as we will also be sharing some links throughout the webinar for your own reference and reading pleasure after today. But before we jump in to our wonderful panel, which you'll see here on the screen, I'm going to start with a quick overview of OneGoal, but I did want to preview for you the 2 experts who will be joining me on the virtual stage in a little bit. OneGoal is incredibly lucky to be able to work with both of these individuals. So joining me today is Dr. Thompson, President of Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education, and Dr. Balkcom, the Director of Rural Programs at the Texas Impact Network and Educate Texas. Dr. Thompson and Dr. Balkcom, we're really excited that you're joining us. I can't wait for us to launch into our panel in a little bit. But before that, I will start us, and apologies for my dog, I will start us off with some quick information about our organization for those of you joining us for the first time. OneGoal's vision is that every student will have an equitable opportunity to achieve their greatest post-secondary aspirations. This is incredibly important given that only 22% of students from low-income communities across this country earn a post-secondary degree compared to 67% of their peers from high-income areas. Apologies, I'm so sorry. Give me a second. I was trying to get my dog out of this room. Next slide, please. Our mission is to lead the movement to transform post-secondary advising and support. And we work with communities across this country primarily through 2 types of partnerships. First, OneGoal, which is a daily class for high school juniors and seniors with an extra year of support during the transition to post-secondary education. Just like math and science are taught during the school day, at OneGoal, we believe that post-secondary planning must be taught and supported during the school day, and that teachers and school can be incredible folks that can be leveraged to support and effectively advise students throughout their high school career. And OneGoal is happy to partner with these schools to support school leaders, teachers, and school staff to do so. And second, the OneGoal Leadership Network. This program provides expert coaching and a community of practice to school and district leaders across this country. And it allows us to stand side by side with leaders to help them build and strengthen the systems and structures that we know will lead to increased post-secondary outcomes for students across their entire district. This year, we'll reach over 13,000 students in OneGoal classes across the country. And we will have partnered with over 40 districts in states across Illinois, Massachusetts, Kentucky, and Michigan through our OneGoal Leadership Network. Now you can learn more about OneGoal by visiting our website, which I'm hoping we can add to the chat. All right, so now that you know a little bit more about OneGoal, we want to make sure this webinar addresses the things that matter to you most. So we are going to start with a question for the audience. And you'll be able to put this in the chat. Given your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that rural districts face in supporting their students' post-secondary paths? I'll give us a couple of minutes to have those start to populate in the chat. So please let us know what's top of mind for you when you think about that question. Again, given your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that rural districts face in supporting their students' post-secondary paths? I see transportation. Absolutely. Thank you, Dora. Under-resourced schools, lack of access to a school counselor, capacity, yep, community partnerships, childcare, all very much exactly what we're ready to talk about today. Transportation and access to teachers who can teach, parents' hesitation to having children leave home, lack of wraparound services. Thank you. These are all wonderful things. Thanks for having these responses come through. All right, I'm going to keep us going, but please keep those coming. And thank you for letting us know what you're thinking. I hope that what we start to share in a bit also kind of resonates with this. As we were prepping for this webinar, we wanted to start with highlighting some of the main challenges we believe are faced, a lot of the ones that you are saying here, by rural districts in supporting post-secondary readiness for their students. As you can see, these are things like school to counselor ratios. Some of you talked about some of this, which currently stands at an average of 385 to 1, according to the US Department of Education. And you'll see that Stephen had put some information in the chat. And in Texas, for example, it's 389 to 1. And in Kentucky, it's 338 to 1. And as you can imagine, this ratio worsens in rural districts and leads to disparities, significantly impacting the quality and availability of supports available to students. Stephen will paste a link to the chat for some more information. But another challenge that is impacting is the availability of funding to support college and career readiness programs. Rural funding is often inequitable, with communities surrounding rural districts having household incomes significantly below poverty line. This lack of funding often hampers the implementation of effective college and career readiness programs, further exacerbating the opportunity gap for our rural students. And lastly, there is a challenge of limited proximity to college campuses. A lot of you mentioned transportation. Many rural districts face barriers in accessing college campuses due to geographical constraints and lack of transportation options. But I would be remiss if I didn't also highlight some of the unique opportunities in these communities. Despite the many challenges, rural districts possess several inherent strengths. These are things like social and relational capital. Rural communities often have strong social networks and close-knit relationships which can be valuable resources for students. Proximity to community resources. Despite potential geographic isolation, rural areas often have a wealth of community resources that can support students, such as libraries, community centers, and local businesses. Strong sense of community. Rural communities tend to have a strong sense of community pride and collaboration, creating a supportive environment for students to pursue goals. And lastly, opportunities for collaboration. Collaboration between schools, community organizations, and local stakeholders is often easier to facilitate in rural areas, providing ample opportunities for partnerships that support students' post-secondary success. These assets absolutely highlight the potential for rural districts to not only address challenges, but also to thrive in fostering college and career readiness for all their students. Now, stay tuned. After the panel discussion, we will be sharing several strategies to support college and career readiness in rural districts. But before we get started with our panelists, I have one more poll question that will help us gauge your interest in staying connected to OneGoal and the work that we're doing across this country. And so that should appear on your screen now. Thank you for filling that out. We will give that a couple of seconds, and then we'll get started with our panel. Looks like it's rolling in. Thank you. Thank you. It's exciting to see the interest folks have. All right. Thank you for completing this poll. Now let's get started with our panel. Please help me welcome once again to our virtual stage, Dr. Thompson, President of Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education, and Dr. Balkcom, the Director of Rural Programs at Texas Impact Network and Educate Texas. Both of these individuals will share from their experiences how different investments and policies can bolster college and career readiness in rural districts. If you have questions for our panelists, please add these to the Q&A section and we will do our best to weave them into our conversation. But without further ado, thank you for joining us, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Balkcom. I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience with all of us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Likewise.
So as I mentioned a little earlier, we will spend about 30 minutes asking you both questions that we at OneGoal have prepared, but as I mentioned, I'm going to try to weave some of the questions from our audience. So if you don't mind, I can kick us off with the first question as some of these other questions roll in. I'm going to get us started here. This will be a question that I'll address to the two of you, and I'll start with you, Dr. Balkcom. Can you share insights into the current state of post-secondary readiness in rural districts from your vantage point?
Sure. So I think one of the things that often comes up is that college readiness is a particular challenge for rural districts. But when it's adjusted for other factors like median household income, for example, college readiness isn't markedly different from our urban peers across Texas, at least. What we've found is that the particular challenge for rural districts in college readiness is much more about opportunity. Our rural districts have less opportunity to offer college level coursework. And Lori, I saw that dual credit note in your chat earlier. You're dead on there. And they also have fewer opportunities to participate in other types of college readiness programming and access entry points. So to address those particular things, we're targeting increased rates of Texas Success Initiative completion. That's our college readiness assessment here in the state of Texas, as well as providing a variety of college coursework in high school opportunities to our students, whether that's dual credit, whether that is some sort of career pathway, or some other opportunity that we're able to work with districts and colleges to create partnership for.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Thompson, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, sure. This is an important question to me. I am from a rural district in central Appalachia. So knowing that to be able to make sure that our students will have an opportunity to not only have access to college, but have success in college is a crucial piece of what we're trying to do in post-secondary in the state. For an example, when I took over higher ed, we set an attainment goal of 60% of our citizens having a post-secondary credential by 2030. And one of the other things I did coming in, I made us a test optional state. Because what we know is that your high school GPA and the courses you take have a more direct effect on college readiness and college success. And that's what we wanted to do. And what we found out in our rural districts, as we traveled around the state talking, many didn't have knowledge of how to necessarily get on the path of success. This is why advising is so important. We also found out they weren't getting access to the kind of college-ready, quote-unquote, courses that they need, or those college courses that you can take while you're in high school. For an example, we found out that 1 in 5 had an opportunity to take an AP course. And then on about 5% of those passed that AP course. And so we're in charge of the dual credit policies. So we wanted to make sure then we had dual credit to make up for those lacking in that particular area. But more than anything else, we wanted to make sure that they knew about it. Because the other thing that we found out is we have a low college going rate in the state, even though we've done really well once we've got them in college, is to make sure that they knew they were college material. And that's a college, maybe given a workforce certificate all the way to a 4-year degree. So that information had to get there also for them to follow through. That's why, once again, we in our shop counted on advising as a key element, advising in high school and how post-secondary can join in with helping them to build that bridge, if you will, between believing they can go to college, knowing how to align their credit to go to college, and then what opportunities they had once they got into college.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Thompson. Oh, Dr. Balkcom, were you going to share something?
Oh, no, you're good. I was just to throw in that I'm so glad, Dr. Thompson, that you added that bit about access at the end there, because we find ourselves at Texas Impact Network and Educate Texas often having the conversation about what we mean by access. And it's not just getting in the door, it's access to completion and the support needed to provide that real opportunity, not just a foot in the door to our rural students.
I couldn't agree more with the two of you. Now, Dr. Thompson, you mentioned quite a bit some of the initiatives and the efforts that you are trying to do in Kentucky to be able to support students on this pathway to post-secondary education. And I also know that, and our audience might not know, but OneGoal does partner with a number of Kentucky districts, specifically districts in rural Kentucky. What were you looking for in particular when you decided to engage with OneGoal through this work for us to really support these districts, specifically as we're thinking about our joint goal to increase post-secondary readiness, access, and success?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't know you don't have an opportunity if you don't know you have an opportunity. Just let me say that. So increased awareness was a key item to us. The idea that we had to work with our advisors, we had to work with our counselors in K-12 to make sure that they helped us, partnering with you, mattered in this case. But we also had to do alignment, if you will. Even though we offer dual credit scholarships, you can take up to 12 hours free. There's an affordability issue there too, because one of the things I didn't mention earlier, many of our rural students really said, well, I can't afford to go to college. And we found out it wasn't that they couldn't afford to go to college, they just didn't know that they could. So a part of this is not just aligning with them the opportunity of taking courses while they're still in high school, but the idea that these courses were college level courses that could end up being very much an item that helped them in the affordability area. But we had to work with our community colleges to make this alignment happen. And we had to work with our 4-year institutions to create these 2+2s, but we had to let them know what that looked like, right? You had to lay it out very clearly as a path toward their success. So one of the biggest items that we have still in Kentucky is to help people to understand that college is important. And as I said earlier, we wanted 60% by 2030, but we know that in Kentucky, 62% have to, in order to be a participant in the economy, have to have a post-secondary credential of some sort. And that 90% will have to have one to even skill up to get a promotion. So the idea of aligning this with the ultimate plan that they may want to have with career as well as the opportunity of return on investment was a part also that we wanted to do. So it really becomes holistic, because even though we became a test optional state, one of the things that we did instead was saying if students came in that were not quote unquote college ready, we had to give them those wraparound services that they need. So we found out it's even more efficient for us and more effective if post-secondary reaches down and in partnership with K-12 to create that. I believed in this so much, one of the areas that I created at my agency was a P20 department that would do exactly that and work with OneGoal, would work with the Kentucky Advising Academy, would work with a variety of other folks in our P12 arena to make sure some of this happened. So we partnered with you because we knew there was a gap in a variety of areas, but awareness was a big area.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Thompson. And it's so critical that you mentioned some of this alignment work. And it's a lot of what our leadership coaches do through our OneGoal Leadership Network is really, like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, stand side by side our district and school leaders to be able to create this alignment, to be able to build the infrastructure that allows for ultimately the information, the advising to trickle down to the students to be able to access the many things that states are establishing to support their post-secondary pathway. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about that. Now, Dr. Balkcom, I'm going to turn it over to you. As the Director of Rural Programs at the Texas Impact Network and Educate Texas, can you share with us and our audience what have been some of the key findings or observations that you've made as you've come across the post-secondary readiness work across rural Texas?
Sure. I think I'll go the observation route. I talked a little bit about college readiness and opportunity earlier, and I'll add that we have two primary state policies that were put in place, particularly to address both funding to support these kinds of efforts for college, career, and military readiness, as well as lowering cost for post-secondary participation, particularly dual credit, in partnership with our K-12 districts and community colleges. That sounds fantastic, and it really is if a district has the resources needed to effectively implement those policies and therefore pull down additional funding and partner with a college to provide opportunity, as well as all of the wraparound services from support, childcare, transportation, et cetera, that our rural students need to have addressed before they can fully participate. I'll say that's not something that was new to us, ensuring that policy can be equitably implemented, but it is something that we focus on quite a lot. And it's something that all of our rural districts are all too familiar with, but sometimes is a surprise to those in other districts or working in policy and advocacy. I'll add just on top of that, that one other thing that we find quite a bit with college readiness is the conversation of what do we mean by college? Do we mean a traditional four-year baccalaureate degree? Well, sometimes we do, and sometimes we mean a credential or a certificate, and those items are certainly post-secondary, and they certainly are valuable. So I think those two big things, policy and elevating the importance and value of career and technical coursework, are big items for us across Texas.
And I also share that we're really excited. This upcoming fall, we will launch our work with a number of districts in Texas with the support of the Texas Impact Network. So thank you, Dr. Balkcom, to really start to support districts to do some of this work that you're talking about. And so our leadership coaches are excited to start the work in Texas, and we know that it's needed, and we're excited to join and lock arms with you to do some of this work. Now, Dr. Thompson, there's a question in the chat for you. Can you walk us through how you engaged the students and their parents in the outreach that you all did?
We do it in several ways. First of all, I should have added that we have the statewide Gear Up group that is really focused on 4 pillars. And what we know with any student to reach success, there's 4 elements that you can look at all the research that points to. That the family has to be involved. Not all the time are the parents, but people that can be involved in that student's outcome is crucial. The second thing is the community. And the community really consists of a variety of things, business, industry, churches, but peers mainly. So how do we operationalize And my mama always said, boy, if you hang out with the no goods, you'll be no good. So how can we do something formal with peers being a part of it? The third is the institution. How do we provide those courses, those things that are needed to do that? And then how can that institution replicate, especially number one and number two? So we are working with schools to help them to reach out to parents and other family members and those that may act like a family member, but that care about that student. The fourth one is the student, him or herself. How do we build that level of not just knowledge base, but that social intelligence to know how to reach out and get what they don't have to be successful? First of all, to recognize what they need to be successful and what they can go about doing themselves without other added help, but to reach out to other people. So we work with the Partnership Gear Ups in Kentucky, which is coming out of Partners for Education in the Berea area. And we work also with the schools itself and community-based organizations to do very similar items. But we're also now, and I'll talk about it here in a little bit, hopefully, about what we're doing with our business communities and what they want to do to actually add some of these elements to for parent education and really be able to do some health education as an example why it's going along. So we are really starting this truly at a holistic grassroots level. Now, what we know, we got a long way to go because we're still missing a lot. So the biggest thing we're doing is looking at data, both qualitative and quantitative, that allows us to continue to build on that base of knowledge. Now, once again, someone's going to say, well, I know so-and-so, you're not doing that really well. Yes, we know that. But we also had to come up with a process and a paradigm to be able to do that. And there's a lot more to that answer that you won't give me time enough to answer, but that's the way we are approaching it.
Yes, no, absolutely. You will have some time. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Balkcom, maybe, and you talked a little bit about the importance of partnerships, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Balkcom, and then I would love to hear some of those insights from you, Dr. Thompson. What role do partnerships with local businesses, organizations, higher education institutions, do you believe, like, what is the role that they play in promoting post-secondary readiness, especially as you think about rural communities?
I think that the role of partnerships is critical, but yet again, something that's a little bit more challenging in some ways for our rural communities, at least in Texas. We have a number of organizations throughout the state that serve our larger urban centers in an intermediary or convener type of role. But that's largely a gap across rural Texas, which, yes, we know is vast. And about 85% of Texas land is considered rural. So it's a pretty big swath there across the state. But there's no convening organization statewide. We do have a few community organizations that are very strong with their partnership and philanthropy and engage with our education partners. But by and large, we really wanted to launch just that partnership. How can we provide policy and advocacy support meshed with implementation and technical assistance while we pull in partners from the community to make sustainable efforts in partnership? All of which is to say, I think it's critical. I think it looks a little bit different in rural than it might in an urban center with more nonprofits, more conveners, more intermediaries. On the flip side of that, I also think that when partnerships are put together effectively and sustainably in our rural communities, we see incredible outcomes and we see a very high level of community strength and cohesion that I think really outpaces some of our urban peers, to be honest.
It sounds like you all at the Texas Impact Network are playing very much this connector role, right? Bringing some of these potential partnerships to some of these rural communities. Dr. Thompson, I know you mentioned the power of partnerships and some of the partnership work that's happening across Kentucky. Can you give us some examples of some of those partnerships and what would you like to highlight for our friends here on the webinar today?
Absolutely. But let me be clear as I give you these examples to understand exactly what we're ultimately trying to do. We know that very few people want to go to college that don't want a job afterwards. And that's important for us to understand. that all of our post-secondary institutions and our K-12 folks are interludes to a career. So how do we work together in that way to do so? Well, we're going to have to get other partners on of this continuum to be very much engaged with us on the front end. And we're talking about our business and industry mainly. And that's what we did in Kentucky, so much so a part of the division a division that we created in my agency is that of workforce and business partnerships. And so what we did, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I can give you a lot more, but a couple of quick examples. We convinced the legislature to give us $10 million to reach out and go into communities that help them to build a pipeline in healthcare. Because we know our rural communities are lacking business and industry to help them to sustain what they need to sustain. So, but there are items that are there that we can really build the population and student input as well as outputs with employers engaged with us. So we took that $10 million and we reached to all parts of the state, heavily focused on for our campuses to get this money, to have a connection with P12, have a connection with those underrepresented, underserved populations, and to really work with employers on the front end to design programs, pathways, pipelines, and things like work-based learning, and have them put their skin in the game. So with that 10 million, we got 48 partners, many in rural Kentucky, that put 50 million in. And so we start building these relationships to actually supply what's needed in those districts, especially the rural districts. But we also know that we have an issue in this state with mental health. We do all across the nation. And we also have an issue with some behavioral issues, especially drug usage. And how do we help solve that issue? So what we did heavily, we created other programs with our Department of Health and Human Services as well. I mean, with our Division of Health and Human Services, as well as other partners, healthcare partners. And we created this behavioral health program called CLIMB that would allow people that have been formerly involved in substance abuse to come out, get a post-secondary certificate, and actually take part in a pipeline. Ultimately, they can get a degree in social work, but they can go into the workforce immediately. You can go into the healthcare industry on the physical health side immediately with a CNA or LPN. Then the healthcare folks would actually pay to move you through the pipeline. So these kinds of partnerships we've now created all over the state, but heavily focused on the rural portions of our state to supply what's needed, obviously, but also to give people an opportunity to change generational status and the outcomes that they want. So that's one example. We're very proud of that, but we're creating this with other industries also. And by the way, just going back to an earlier question, many of these folks are also supplying childcare because we know that's needed to help many of these folks get back engaged. We're also supplying marketing processes that shows this relationship. We're doing a lot of training to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But more than anything else, we're bringing workforce in on the front end. And we're not waiting for them to hire people on the back end. And they've appreciated that approach.
Thank you for sharing. It sounds like you are also playing the role of a facilitator and making sure that we're building these connections between industry and the schools and systems that we want to most support across Kentucky as well. We have a question from Lori in the chat. You two both mentioned a lot around, or shared with us quite a bit around how you play the facilitator role to prompt some of these partnerships. But what happens? What is your advice? And either one of you can start. What is your advice when it comes to partners like post-secondary institutions, in Lori's case, a community college, who want to be able to establish these partnerships? What advice do you have for somebody like Lori?
Well, I can jump in and say I think Dr. Thompson was spot on with needing the community, employers, and education sectors, both K-12 and higher ed, to be at the table from the beginning. I would say, Lori, not knowing your state or particular context, I might start with identifying a common pathway or common need among those rural districts, and seeing who can fill in resources where they're needed, as well as what employers might be eager to come to the table and what community organizations are already deeply engaged across those areas. Of course, it's great if they're already engaged in education. It's also very possible to bring them to the table and get them invested in education. Especially if you've got a contingent of rural districts as well as your college. That's an incredibly strong position.
Absolutely. And I want to add a couple of things. Without a doubt, I think you'll have to come to the table with a couple other items. One is saying that we have a North Star that we're all working toward. And that's what our 60 by 30 is. Everybody has to buy into that vision first, because the object, and we're glad to work with OneGoal for this reason, to really change the culture of the way we've done businesses in the past, in this area. But then we also have to lay out exactly how to get to that 60 by 30 with everybody getting engaged from where they're at and getting comfortable, if you will, to add their power into the process. And we have found out that when we allow everybody to listen to each other and talk about, at the very minimum, the things that they possibly were doing in their own silos, but wasn't being very successful, how that could be redone with everybody under one roof. So that's the first thing I would argue. But then you have to be really clear. Your strategies have to be really focused. One example we're doing with our basic needs work that's coming out of our Student Success Collaborative. We're really clear that we want everyone in our community and technical colleges to help those students that are needing basic benefits, right? Not just food, but maybe can join get on SNAP to help them get through the process of being successful. So some of the items that we wanted to make sure we do is not just getting anybody to buy into the big picture or North Star, but they would know clearly how to do it, and then where they fit into that pipeline process, where they fit into, and also at different times creating a continuous improvement item where they would look at not just the items that they needed, but maybe some of the items they haven't utilized. So for us, it became that process, and it's working beautifully so. Now, let me be clear, we've got such a long way to go. But we knew we had to start somewhere. And so far, what we've been able to see and how we're able to assess it, we ourselves that are in policy places are designing policies to help us get there. One other item I will say, provide real data. And not just data by itself, but analytics that shows that those inputs that they're putting in will have a predictive value of getting something out. And what I just gave you earlier with our partnership with healthcare, we were able to do that and show the results because we're up in enrollment in all of those areas more than any other area. So they also need to be a part of the celebration when they see this and also be able to understand what they need to do next.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the concept of data. As an organization, we pride ourselves on being a data-driven organization and really bringing that into our relationships with school and district partners. Dr. Thompson, can you share some examples? And Dr. Balkcom, I'll pass it on to you too, in case you have any, of what specifically are some of those data points that you all are tracking in Kentucky. You mentioned continuous improvement. How are you leveraging data, and what kind of data are you specifically leveraging to assess the progress and the impact of all of the different initiatives taking place across your two states?
Well, thank you for that question. Let me be, once again, let me brag on Kentucky a little bit. We have one of the best data systems in the country. But once again, I'm talking about our North Star, 60 by 30, that's one. But then we're going to talk about what it's going to take to get us there. And how do we get there with a better high school going rate and a high school success rate once they get into college? And then we lay out data points all the way down to each district, to each high school that looks at those points about everything from how many dual credit courses they take. And by the way, in our new policy, we had to set an attainment goal there. right? We want 50% of all of our students to have a dual credit course before they get out of high school. So we start looking and setting North Stars at what I call the most minute level, and look at student level data as well as school level data that helps us then to identify. We found out, and also do assessment. We found out that when we had been in this game long enough to measure and see the impact that dual credit may have on college success. And we found out if you happen to be an African American and took a dual credit course, you had actually greater success in college than your counterparts. So what we found out then, that we didn't have enough people of color going into that pipeline. So we pointed out to the schools exactly where they're at, and we gave them resources with our advising academy as well as others to help them to build those pipelines to get the outcome. Now, I keep on going with these examples forever, but I think you know where I'm going. If everybody knows what their data are, but not as a way to smack them on the hand, but as a way to outline a process to help them to get where they need to go to serve all students, they're all into it. But we also have to do a lot of training, and that's what our P20 folks are doing. That's what our Kentucky Advising Academy are doing. We also have to equip people with the ability or the knowledge to help do these items, once again, in partnership, as we mentioned earlier, to help get us there.
You got a shout out in the chat, Dr. Thompson. Jessica posted a link to the data systems that you're talking about. And so if you folks are interested, please do check out the link that Jessica added. Dr. Balkcom, anything you'd like to add around how is Texas, how are you all at the Texas Impact Network and Educate Texas thinking about data, monitoring progress across different benchmarks to assess the impact of the different work taking place?
Sure. So I'll add, Texas also has a statewide goal for increasing the number and percentage of college graduates across the state in the coming years. And that is also very helpful for us to have kind of a single goal that everyone is pushing toward, and to have it undergirded with policy. So while I agree with everything Dr. Thompson said, to offer something a little different, I'll focus on the policy aspects that we work with at the Texas Impact Network. First, we are designed to participate in policy and advocacy, as well as to assist with implementation on the other side. So the two policies that we're working with that I mentioned earlier, one is surrounding increasing student achievement on college, career, and military readiness. The other is more about college coursework in high school. For data, I'll focus on the CCMR one because it's been in place longer. We've got a little bit more data. We, of course, track statewide metrics on college readiness assessment, post-secondary application and matriculation activity, and degrees, certificates, and workforce pathways that are completed in high school. We really take that sort of practical and policy meshing approach to figure out where we're making a real tangible difference, how we're supporting policy, and what we need to advocate for in our rural districts moving forward to make policy more equitable, and importantly, to make it more accessible. Because as I said at the top of the call, policy can't help our rural districts if they don't have the human or fiscal resources to properly implement it.
I would like to add one thing, if I might, since she brought it up and it's important. You know, we set the statewide agenda for our colleges and universities, and we have this clearly there, that they build their plans around. The other thing I would say is that we not only lay out our policy processes that focuses on this, we have a performance funding model that we just increased, for an example, low income, a significant amount, where many of these districts we're talking about fall in that category, where campuses are getting more money if they get these students and get them to the point of success. We're also looking at how we can operationalize those things like our dual credit scholarships or work ready scholarships to be able to make sure that it's equitably distributed to those communities to take advantage of, but then giving them information how to do it. So once again, I could talk more about this. And I see something also in the chat. I'll just say, a goal of ours is by 2030, and people say, Thompson, you're crazy for having this goal. And I say, no, because even if we don't reach it, we'll know where we're at. 100% of all of our students, either in high school or post-secondary, will have an internship, externship, co-op, apprenticeship, or something, because what we know, the more we make this real to them, higher the student's success. And not only that, the more we can get employers to be engaged with us to do that, that's very much a part of what we're doing with our partnerships, the more they can get the workforce that they need with those employability skills that they need. And I'll even throw another one in. We're creating a graduate profile in Kentucky to where we're putting in 10 essential employability skills that we're incorporating throughout all of our programs. All of our four-year institutions and two-year institutions that are public are engaged in this. And a part of that is to be pushing those internships, those employer advisory groups to all units, laying out exactly how they can even get a sociology degree, and that could lead to the outcomes that they need to have in business or wherever they may go. So this is very much a part of the overall process that we use in Kentucky that we're going to continue to use.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Thompson. And thank you for keeping an eye on the chat as well. I appreciate you being responsive to some of the questions coming in. Speaking of the chat, Charlene now has asked a couple of times, I think, around anything you all would highlight, and Dr. Balkcom, I can start with you if it's okay, around student interest in terms of staying local to their communities, to the rural communities that they come from, potentially interest to like own their own business and actually grow the talent within those communities. And if so, can you highlight any of those insights that you might have, and any ways in which maybe that's informing the work with post-secondary institutions or the business sector in some of those communities?
Absolutely. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to address this. I had started to type a very long reply in the chat and decided it was just too long, and I would respond independently if I had to. That said, I don't know about rising interest, but I do know about high interest. And I will say in Texas, something on the order of greater than 80% of students return to their communities, and a higher percentage even than that express a desire to either stay in or return to their communities after they complete their post-secondary work. That said, I wanted to offer just one concrete strategy that we've used with all of the rural districts that we work with that seems to be particularly effective at addressing how you shape pathways, courses, and post-secondary partnerships. And that is, at least in Texas, we know that the regional workforce analyses and statewide workforce analyses don't apply directly to each rural community. So for a relatively low cost, but very high payoff on the other end, we work with each district to provide, through a third-party company, a customized labor market analysis, taking into account the characteristics of the community and the tendencies of the community to stay in a certain radius or work in certain kinds of patterns. Providing that analysis has really made a big difference in both the ways that our high schools and community colleges and even some of our 4 years partner, as well as the effectiveness with which we're able to serve students and really see them through that whole pathway in relevant areas. And I think it was Michelle earlier had posted a comment about jobs that are relevant to the community. That's something we're very sensitive to and really actively work to implement relevant partnerships, not just partnerships.
Thank you for sharing. We are getting close to the end of our webinar here today, but I have one more question. The two of you spoke a lot around the policy levers, the advocacy levers that both your organizations and the broader work is leveraging in both Kentucky and Texas. Can you share a little bit with our audience as a kind of closing thought? How can educators and key stakeholders across our country advocate for these policy changes and that address the unique needs of rural communities. And many of the ways that you all have already expressed is taking place in Kentucky and Texas.
Well, first of all, to even build on the last one, we have to know exactly what rural communities the folks are saying, because fairly often we provide solutions without asking them for solutions from them. And what we found out in Kentucky is that there is a place-based mentality. They want to stay there, but they're having to leave to get jobs. So we're going to have to work with business and industry at the same time as we are to build this pipeline for them to have an educated workforce that they need to do so. That we're in the middle of that. And that's an important item to understand. But the other thing too is that if you don't start the process with that community in mind, and you just build on strategies that someone else used somewhere else. And I'm not saying Texas and Kentucky, I would say we have a lot of differences in our rural communities. Not all are the same. So I think you have to be able to really understand where you're working with. Once again, we have a great data system. We have job analysis. We have everything that we need. Even our campuses have to build their programs around designing to help the communities that they serve. So we have a lot of those things in place, but we're also going to have to work with business and industry to say, come on, we can provide you with a workforce if you go to the Clay County, Kentucky, where I'm from, to do that. And there's, once again, more to this answer than we have time for, but I would just ask folk who are making policies, don't make policies outside of talking to the people in the communities that you're going to serve, because it won't work. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, don't do it in a pejorative way. Do it in a partnership way. And these are the sorts of things that have shown to be really successful. We just built some scholarships for those community members that can go and get a degree in their community and go immediately into the workforce that's moving there. Those are examples of some of the things that we're currently doing.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So often, the large-scale programming is very prescriptive, or if it's implemented in rural communities, it's just a scaled-down model of the same thing that's happening, and that's really not effective. I think a key takeaway, at least for organizations like the Texas Impact Network, and it sounds like a lot of the work that Dr. Thompson is doing too, though I won't tread too far into that, is that we really aim to function as a scaffold. We don't want to come in and provide a program that has to be offered in perpetuity for the community to continue reaping benefits. We want to listen to what each of our communities need, work with them to build systemic solutions that work for them. And ideally, we should be stepping out of that picture once we've provided some resourcing and scaffolding to community success.
Thank you both. You have been incredibly gracious with your time today. I know our audience, I'm sure, appreciates the brilliance that you shared today and the many examples that you brought to our conversation. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to speak with us. I want to thank you all for your partnership in your respective states. OneGoal is lucky to be able to be partnering with each of your organization to collectively continue to accomplish a lot of the things that you all have set out to accomplish for the students across your entire state. So I want to thank you personally, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Balkcom. And Dr. Thompson, I saw you come off mute.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you and OneGoal. We look forward to our continued partnerships.
Thank you all. And friends on the webinar, we have a couple more minutes here. I know we're going to get our deck up and running really quickly. We at OneGoal, again, want to thank you all for joining us today. Here on the screen, you'll see both Dr. Thompson and Dr. Balkcom talked about how there's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to strategies to supporting this kind of work in these communities. However, we wanted to leave you all with some of the ways in which we are trying to support this work across states like Kentucky, Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts. And it's things like expanded dual enrollment opportunities. You heard a lot about this earlier in the conversation. Strengthening the amount of advising and the type of advising that is being provided to students. And obviously, I think we hear this time and time again through a lot of the work that we're doing with students, providing financial aid education and making sure that college is affordable, that these pathways are financially affordable for our students. And so we want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you everybody for engaging in the web in the chat, for sending in your questions. Please follow OneGoal on social media, visit our website, learn more about the work that we're doing to transform post-secondary advising across the country with partners like the ones that you heard from today and many others. And if we can be of any help, please shoot us an email, send us a message on social media. We'd be really excited to continue to connect with you all. And with that, that is it for our webinar today. Thank you all.